told in all four Gospels in our Bible, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and each one offers a very different perspective. For Mark, a lot has already happened when Jesus and the disciples get to this point in the story. And it all happens in one chapter. Chapter 6 is very long. And that is Mark's style in writing. He goes from event to event to event. But just before our story, John the Baptist, who is Jesus' cousin, has been executed in a very brutal and shocking way. And Jesus must have felt his death very personally. He was his cousin who grew up with him. He was someone who his whole purpose was to prepare the way for Jesus before Jesus' ministry began and to get people ready for Jesus' ministry. And so this may be part of the reason why Jesus said to the disciples, let's get out of here and go somewhere else, right? And so they went into a boat, someplace quiet where they could be alone. And so I invite you to put yourselves in this story as if we are the disciples with Jesus, getting in the boat, right, going away, but before they can even get to where they're going, other people have found out. So they're all going to the shore where they're going to arrive. And so if you can imagine being on a boat and just kind of seeing this outline of people, right, and you can't really make out their bodies or how many there are, but then you start to see shapes of bodies, and you realize that there are thousands of people that are waiting on that shore. Now, I can imagine that there is no exhaustion and grief like the exhaustion and grief that Jesus and his disciples are experiencing right now. And I can imagine the disciples saying, "You've got to be kidding me." Now, what they're experiencing is 10 times worse than me personally, but I like to think of this as a Sunday afternoon for me. After I have preached 2 sermons and done a lot of peopling, I love you all so dearly, but it exhausts me. And if I don't have sleep on a Sunday afternoon, I can get very cranky and overly tired and go to bed very early on a Sunday because of it, because I have just been too peopled out, right? I hit a breaking point where I just shut down. And I feel like they're feeling 10 times that, right? And I think that if I were them on this boat, seeing thousands of people, I would just start to cry, right? You're exhausted, and now all these people are in front of us, and they want us to talk to them and to teach them, and it's just too much, right? But they all get out of the boat, and somehow Jesus musters up the energy to be with these people. He starts preaching and teaching. And once it was getting time to eat, right, they're hungry, the disciples tell Jesus that they should probably all just break, right, so that everyone can go and get something to eat. And then Jesus tells his disciples to feed them. So they start talking among themselves how they might pay for a meal for these thousands of people who are gathered. And Jesus asks how much they have, and it's 5 loaves and 2 fish, and this is what happens next. So if you are not familiar with this, that scene comes from the series The Chosen, which I haven't seen all of it, but what I have seen I really love because it makes the stories of the Gospels, which I think can sometimes be hard for our 21st century minds to understand, very relatable, right, in the way that they portray it. The disciples here in this scene are risk takers. They had to have thought that Jesus had gone absolutely mad, right? But they still follow his instructions. They gather up the right amount of baskets. They try to divide it, the little that they have, and somehow it is miraculously enough. When was the last time that you took a risk? We take risks every day, really. Trying a new food or a new restaurant is a risk. Applying to school, enrolling in a college or a program is a risk. Applying for a job or branching out into your own business is very risky. Dating and marriage are all risks. Children are another risk. Giving of yourself, your resources, and your time, that's all risky things. And in all those things, you're really exposing yourself. You're exposing yourself to the potential of danger. And so there's always a risk of embarrassment or failure or hurt. But change cannot happen without taking a risk. Progress and success cannot happen without taking risks. We all know that we are living in difficult times. Each generation, I think, of life has its own difficulties that can seem insurmountable, and we're currently living in a time of deep, deep division in our country. There is chaos in the air, it seems, everywhere we turn. We're forced to take a side, right, and just continue that dividing chasm, keep it very wide, right? And in the midst of all that, I really believe that the church has this great opportunity to tell a different story. We have the power and the calling as followers of Jesus to be a positive change in the world. But sometimes, I think with everything that happens around us, we can feel a bit frozen. Sometimes we might feel like we're birds sitting on a wire just waiting for the world to change. Now, I admit that sometimes I can be like these disciples at the beginning of the story. Maybe you can relate to. They are exhausted, right? The people are exhausting. They're hungry, and I'm hungry. So let's just break, Jesus. Let's go get some food on our own. Maybe we can take a little nap, call it a day, come back tomorrow, right? And then Jesus flips the script, as he so often does, and he says, you feed them. You know, so often I think that we may be longing or even praying for things to change. And Jesus is saying, I'm calling you to be a change maker. I'm calling you to be the change you want to see in the world. And so all of that is the hope behind this new series that we're starting today called the Changemakers. And so in this series, we're going to be talking about, for the next several weeks, about how the church might be the change that we want to see in the world, both as individual people and also as a community together. So throughout this series, we're going to talk through 4 different characteristics of a change maker as we see through the life of Jesus, using different stories throughout the Gospels. And I want to introduce those 4 characteristics today through the lens of our feeding of the 5,000 story. So we're going to go a little deeper as the series goes on, but I want to share with you these 4 characteristics. So first, a change maker is compassionate. Right away in this story, as they come to the shore, Mark says that Jesus saw the great crowd and had compassion on them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus really saw them. You know what it's like when someone really sees you, right? Can see your heart as if they know you. He saw that they were lost, that they were suffering, that they were anxious and worried. But here's the thing, it's one thing to see it, and it's another thing to do something about it. Their suffering mattered to Jesus. His compassion drove him to turn everything on its head, instructing the disciples to feed them. So that change making really begins with compassion. You see something that's wrong in the world and it gets under your skin. That's something different for each of us here, right? And you can't stand the brokenness anymore. And this is so hard often because I think like Jesus and the disciples here, we're tired. We feel as if our love has run out sometimes, as if love has some kind of limit. But what if in those times we could draw on the compassion of Jesus? Because whenever our hearts are full of compassion, whatever we have to give, no matter how big or small, will always be enough because we've started with compassion. So a change maker is compassionate, and a change maker also collaborates. Jesus didn't do ministry alone, and we can't either. Some of you might know this story, but right after Jesus' baptism, before he calls on his disciples into ministry, he goes into the wilderness. He's driven there by the Holy Spirit, we're told, for 40 days. And he fasted during those 40 days, didn't have anything to eat. And during those 40 days, he was tempted. All 4 of the Gospels explain this. And one of the temptations came like this: if you are the Son of God, turn these rocks into bread. And Jesus said, man cannot live on bread alone. and he wouldn't do it. Jesus would not change those stones into bread. He resisted, even though he was probably very hungry. So we might think about this story, right, from the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and wonder, why was transforming stones into food a temptation for Jesus there? But here in this story of feeding the 5,000, multiplying a small amount of food enough to feed thousands of people, why was that a miracle? Well, Jesus could have snapped his fingers, right, in the wilderness while he was all alone, turned the stone into bread, and then it would have been clear to all of us from the beginning that he could do anything all on his own, and he could. That was possible. But now he's with a team, and he's not alone, and his work is not about doing something heroic, right? It's about letting his partners know what's possible and including them in all of that so that they could remember and continue it even when Jesus was no longer there. If you notice, all but the praying piece of this story, of this miracle story, happens through the disciples. Jesus prays, but the disciples find the food. They arrange the people into groups. They face each other in a way that will encourage relationship and sharing. They hand the food out to hungry and grateful people. Together, Jesus and his disciples make a little bit of food enough for many. So a changemaker is compassionate, a changemaker collaborates, and a changemaker is creative. This entire scene of the story as portrayed in The Chosen is 10 minutes long. It was too long for me to play to you. I feel like the clip that I even showed you was long, but it was hard for me to choose how much to share. There's this point, and we read about it too in Mark, when the disciples tell Jesus about everyone's hunger, right? And in the scene, I love how they portray it because Jesus says, well, who will buy some bread for these people? And they explain to Jesus that they only came with 200 denarii, which is not enough to feed everyone, not even enough for a little bit for everyone. They wouldn't even know how to calculate that. And then it's kind of funny because Matthew, who's the tax collector, says, well, I would know how to calculate that, Jesus, if they really wanted me to. But they were trying to be creative, right? Trying to find a solution on how they would feed these people because Jesus really wanted that to happen. So one of them suggested, well, maybe we can go to the city nearby and we can negotiate with someone on a kind of credit basis. But then another said that the nearest city is 9 miles away. They would get there on foot, right? And they said even if we raided every house in that city, we would still have to find a way to bring all that food back here and feed the masses. And so Jesus says, surely there's food for someone, even a small amount. And so then they bring in this boy who has 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 fish. And the boy says, I know that it's not enough. And Jesus says, it's enough for me. I can do a lot with this. Thank you. Sometimes the problems in our world seem insurmountable. Like, I don't have enough, right? It's not enough. And we might look at them and say, I just don't know how to fix this. It's impossible to fix this. But we need to remember that we are children of a very creative God. And Jesus says, look at what's right in front of you. It's enough. It will always be enough. So fourth, a change maker is someone who empowers. This last part is something really important to remember about Jesus. Jesus would not be able to be a political leader because that kind of power is about accumulating and exercising power over something or someone, right? Jesus didn't use his power to control. He used it as a container that he poured from. He emptied himself again and again for people so that they could be healed and so that they could find wholeness. And he offered his power to everyone because there was no reason for him to hoard it all together and keep it to himself, right? He continually empowered his disciples. You feed them. You get them something to eat. You go out and heal people and teach them. You go out and make disciples. You see, this situation, feeding 5,000 people, looked impossible. And by the way, I don't know if you picked up on it, but in Mark, at the very end, he says that those who had eaten were 5,000 men. And I don't know if he was just saying that, but this could mean that there had to have been other women and children that were there too, that maybe doubled or even tripled the amount of people that were there, so that it wasn't just 5,000. No doubt, the situation looked impossible. But with a heart full of compassion, with collaboration with one another, with creativity to see a different perspective, and then with empowerment to let his disciples feed others, they gave a bounty. They created a bounty with just a little. The impossible was possible. It was a risk, but the risk fed everyone. Everyone had enough. And so I wonder, how might God be calling you or calling us to live our lives being open to the possibilities of what we think is impossible? Many of you know that earlier this year, our leadership council came together to do a little visioning work. We realized that there has been so much change in our community in the past 5 to 8 years that we wanted to take a step back and ask the question, who is God calling us to be now? And we talked about how a vision is something that points to the future. It's not something that we are yet, but something that we think Jesus is calling us to be. And so we took a day apart, had a whole retreat led by another leader in our conference. We had several meetings with one another. We spent a lot of time being very intentional about a vision statement. And this is what we came up with. Many of you have heard this before. We envision a community where all are met with love, find acceptance, and are transformed through Jesus. And along with that vision statement, we came up with 3 different values that we feel that we hold on to and ways that we can live into those values and live into that vision. So we shared all of that in dreaming sessions that we held this summer. We're so grateful for the feedback that we received in those and the ways that we kind of dreamed together of how we could live into this. And so now, as part of this series, we're going to be sharing some of what came out of that as we find new ways that we can live into this vision, and also finding out how our existing ministries that we have can live into this vision as well. And this isn't about doing new programs. It's not about filling our calendars with things, right? This is all about making disciples and transformation. As I was making the slide for this, I realized how much this vision statement really connects with our scripture for today. That when they came onto the shore, they met everyone with love, accepted everyone where they were, right? And then transformation was able to happen in that feeding of those 5,000 people. We believe that God can use all the new things that have been happening, all the change that has been happening in our midst, and that those can be fuel to make disciples and fuel to transform. There's also a part of this series that we invite you to grab on your way out if you didn't get one on the way in. That's a journal. And I know not everyone is into journaling, but this is a way for us to journey through this series together, just taking 1 week at a time. It's very small. You could do the whole week in a day if you want, or you can separate it out into days. But there's 2 pages for each week to reflect on the scripture that's been shared on Sunday mornings, and then questions to also think about. It might be good discussion around the dinner table or with your friends as well. But you can start writing and listening and praying about how God might be calling you to be a change maker right where you are.